Most people think of drug use as a modern vice, but archaeology has proven the exact opposite. Beer predates farming, weed was domesticated before wheat, and Göbekli Tepe was a brewery. But the evidence of drug use goes back much further than you'd ever expect. Drugs are everywhere in nature. Think of it. Weed, shrooms, peyote, they're all just sitting there waiting to be used. And dozens of wild animals have been documented enjoying their psychoactive effects. Birds get stoned on marijuana seeds, and elephants get drunk on any fermented fruit they can find. Like sex, hunger, and thirst, the pursuit of intoxication can never be repressed. It is biologically inevitable. But from an evolutionary perspective, this is difficult to explain. Birds drunk on fermented fruits fly headfirst into windows, while disoriented monkeys ignore their young and wander off into the jaws of predators. Intoxication is dangerous and often leads to death. If we are truly the product of natural selection, what could explain this? According to ethnobotanist Giorgio Samarini, the risk is worth it because intoxication promotes lateral thinking. Lateral thinking is thinking outside the box, without which a species would be unable to come up with new solutions to old problems and eventually go extinct. Intoxication is therefore a useful evolutionary survival strategy, and the implications of this idea for human evolution are profound. And that brings us to a bold theory. What if what helped us ascend from primitive ape to tool-using human was getting high? The stoned ape theory proposes that psilocybin mushrooms drove evolution forward, making us more intelligent, socially complex, and successful. The truth is that psychedelic mushrooms were abundant across the environment our ancestors evolved in. These early humans, such as Australopithecines, mainly ate plants, and mushrooms were certainly on the menu. There is no doubt that ancient humans ate psilocybin mushrooms and experienced the mind-expanding effects. Philosopher Terence McKenna, who came up with the stoned ape theory, proposed that shroom consumption by early humans gave them an advantage while hunting and foraging. He based this on a study which found that psychedelic mushrooms could increase edge detection and visual acuity, helping our ancestors hunt and forage more effectively. The shrooms may have also increased sexual arousal, leading to a reproductive benefit. Higher doses would dissolve the ego, leading to a more selfless and efficient group. So the mushrooms were there, our ancestors were eating them, and they genuinely altered the mind. So did they make us human? McKenna was harshly criticized by academics and not without reason. The study he based his whole hypothesis on actually concluded that psilocybin may not be conducive to the survival of an organism. The sexual arousal claim had no scientific backing either. But most importantly, the effects of shrooms are temporary and are not passed down to your offspring. But academics didn't reject the stone ape theory because ancient humans weren't eating mushrooms. They rejected it because McKenna overclaimed what those mushrooms did. The mushrooms were absolutely there, and our ancestors were probably eating them. They may have helped our ancestors with the lateral thinking that is needed to invent new tools and strategies. So did shrooms make us human? Probably not on their own, but they almost certainly had an effect on the evolution of lateral thinking. Psilocybin mushrooms are one of the most potent mind-expanding substances out there. During times of hardship, they may have helped our ancestors come up with new solutions to age-old problems. Unfortunately, finding direct evidence for this is impossible, but hard to deny nonetheless. I also love just thinking about a bunch of Homo erectus just sitting around tripping in Pleistocene Africa. Imagine being stoned in an environment with giant baboons, lions, paranthropus, and all you have to defend yourself is a wooden spear. The more you learn about human evolution, I swear the more absurd it gets. And as it turns out, shrooms were just the beginning. As our species evolved, mushroom use became institutionalized. Shamanism is one of the oldest spiritual practices on Earth. It is built entirely around altered states of consciousness. The shaman often ingests a substance, accompanied with dancing and drumming that allows them to enter the spirit world. Here, they obtain knowledge and wisdom to bring back to their group. It's the same exact lateral thinking we talked about earlier, except now it has a job title. Our earliest evidence comes from Europe around 40,000 years ago, where archaeologists have found bone flutes, hybrid figurines, and abstract cave art. Depictions of human-animal hybrids are highly indicative of shamanism, because in traditional societies, shamans often wear the costumes of animals to gain their power. There is no doubt that shamanism was common throughout the world this early on, and they almost certainly were consuming psychoactive substances. Shamans in Siberia conduct these traditions with mushrooms to this day, and their culture traces directly back to the Ice Age. But an incredible site in North Africa finally proved this connection. In the Tassili N'Ajjer Plateau in the Sahara Desert, there is a cave painting depicting something profound. A strange masked figure with mushrooms growing out of every surface, his hands full of shrooms. The distinctive round caps almost certainly represent psilocybin mushrooms. But the figure isn't alone. Around him, figures dance in elaborate costumes, while others make love. The whole scene carries the unmistakable appearance of a ceremony with people in altered states of consciousness. Other cave art from the same time period in Spain depicts mushrooms as well. Shamanism was the most common religious practice across the entire world during the Stone Age, and it seems institutionalized mushroom use was common as well. I have been studying human evolution for years, and honestly I think I vastly underestimated the role of psychoactive substances in our development. Another substance has been used since the Ice Age that you have probably consumed. Wild cannabis was growing across Europe and Asia before our species even existed. Ancient humans have been living among this plant since the first Homo erectus left Africa some 2 million years ago. In its undomesticated form, it is fairly low in THC, the chemical that gets you high. But it is very high in CBD, a chemical which helps with anxiety and pain relief. The seeds are also edible, and the plant itself makes very strong cordage. This plant was very useful to our ancestors. But did they actually get stoned in the Stone Age? Recent DNA evidence found around 12,000 years ago, two families of cannabis diverged, one used for hemp and the other for THC. Meaning as far back as the end of the last Ice Age, ancient humans were cultivating cannabis for multiple purposes, including drug use. High THC varieties could have simply been consumed like an edible or smoked. At 12,000 years old, this puts its domestication slightly before any food crops. It actually could be the earliest plant ever domesticated. It is still contested where it was first domesticated, most likely being East Asia. Our earliest direct evidence comes from the Oki Islands near Japan, where 10,200-year-old cannabis seeds were found in Jomon pots. Ancient China and India documented using cannabis in spiritual rituals, along with many other cultures. Herodotus, the world's first historian, documented its use by the Central Asian Scythians. He writes, "The Scythians, as I said, take some of this hemp seed, and, creeping under the felt coverings, throw it upon red-hot stones. Immediately it smokes, and gives out such a vapor as no Greek vapor bath can exceed. The Scyths, delighted, shout for joy." The Scythians were the pioneers of mounted warfare, known as brutal warriors, but it seems they loved a high as much as the rest of us. Cannabis would make its way into cultures all over Europe and Africa as it spread with trade, becoming important to many religious practices. I don't know about you, but I find it hilarious that one of the first plants we ever domesticated wasn't to feed villages. No, it was more important, it was to get high. But the next example is even funnier. Humans may actually have invented civilization so they could get a steady flow of beer. Alcohol is one of the oldest intoxicating substances consumed by humans. Fruit naturally ferments in the wild, and chimpanzees purposefully seek out this food source, consuming over 2 drinks a day worth of alcohol. Our ancestors were almost certainly doing the same thing, but at some point we developed a more efficient method. In the Levant region starting 15,000 years ago, the Natufian culture began harvesting wild grains in abundance. They were grinding them up into flour using stones, giving them a calorie-rich food staple. By mixing with water, they made nutritious porridges, and if left out, would ferment into alcohol. And we don't just have to hypothesize. Researchers have found residue of beer dating back 13,000 years ago in the Levant. At Haifa Cave, stone mortars were carved into the cave floor, where wheat and barley-based alcohol were ground and fermented. This proves that beer predates agriculture and even civilization by thousands of years. Imagine getting together with your lads in a cave, brewing some beer, and getting drunk 13,000 years ago. Sounds wonderful. But scholars believe that the impact of beer on human culture was far more profound. Göbekli Tepe is one of the most important archaeological sites in the world. It proved that thousands of years before writing or civilization, humans could get together and create massive structures. But recent evidence suggests it may have actually been the world's first pub. Göbekli Tepe shows no evidence of permanent habitation. The people who built it by all evidence were hunter-gatherers. Plenty of plant and animal remains have been found at the site, all of which were undomesticated. But their abundance suggests that lavish feasts occurred here, feasts which included beer. In multiple rooms at Göbekli Tepe, trough-shaped limestone vessels have been found. They are built into the floor of the room. 6 have been found, and in total, add up to 160 liters. A grayish-black residue was found in the lower part of the vessel. Chemical analysis found evidence of oxalate. Oxalate develops during the steeping, mashing, and fermentation of cereals, and can indicate the production of beer. It is still contested if this proves for certain that beer was being produced, as old porridge could hypothetically leave the same trace, though many scholars are convinced beer was being made. The beer would have had an alcohol concentration of only about 2%, but considering these people had no alcohol tolerance and there was about 40 liters in one trough, the effect would have been noticeable. But beyond the fun that may have gone along with consuming alcohol, beer was safer to consume than water in these days. Thus, it was nutritious and safe. The vessels are often surrounded by benches which could have sat more than a dozen people. The perfect structure for communal feasting and drinking. Getting drunk with your tribe at Göbekli Tepe must have been a great time. These feasts were clearly important to bring large groups of people together to bond, share ideas, but also to move massive stones like those found at Göbekli Tepe. To supply these feasts, more grain and meat was needed, possibly helping to spur on the domestication of both plants and animals. Genetic analysis has shown that the domestication of both einkorn and emmer wheat took place in close vicinity to Göbekli Tepe. Therefore, farming and ultimately civilization may have been the byproducts of brewing beer. I mean, after all, what greater incentive is there than beer? And the more you think about it, the more it makes sense. The consumption of alcohol helps communities bond, relieve stress, but also leads to that lateral thinking we were talking about earlier. And this may have led to new ideas in these communities. But every drug we've mentioned so far are tame compared to what we discovered in the Americas. In South America, a variety of incredibly potent drugs have been used since the Stone Age, one of which is coca leaves, the active ingredient of course being cocaine. Coca leaves naturally grow all over the Andes. Chewing the leaves provides a mild energy boost and relief, but of course ancient humans found a way to intensify their effects. Archaeologists excavating a house from 8,000 years ago found coca leaves on the floor, and along with them were pieces of calcite. Calcite helps to release organic compounds. When combined with coca leaves, it creates a much more intense high. The quantities of the leaves suggest that the wider community was coming together to chew coca leaves recreationally. And the time period just so happened to line up with the explosion of systematic farming in the region. So coked up farmers were spearheading civilization in the Andes. Guys, I'm starting to think that drugs really did create civilization. Coca would remain popular as cultures rose and fell in the Andes. Ancient pottery depicts people with bulged cheeks, presumably chewing coca leaves. Evidence suggests it became part of elaborate and often deadly rituals. And this brings us to one of the most haunting archaeological discoveries of all time. The children of Lula Iliko. In 1999, a man hiked Lula Iliko, one of the tallest mountains in South America. Here he discovered a strange stone structure with 3 children inside. Due to the cold and dry conditions, they were almost perfectly preserved, except for one which was struck by lightning at some point. They were buried along with figurines made of precious metals and other grave goods. Analysis found that the children were sacrificed in an Incan religious ritual taking place around 500 years ago. They were drugged with an immense amount of coca leaves and corn beer, and they seem to have died in their sleep and placed atop the mountain. The practice of ritual sacrifice in the Andes was intended to ensure health, rich harvests, and favorable weather. While certainly barbaric to us, it was different times back then. Human sacrifice was once incredibly common across the ancient world. But what's even crazier is what archaeologists discovered at Cahuachi in Peru. It served as a major religious center of Nazca culture 2,000 years ago. Due to the very dry conditions, the burials at the site led to bodies naturally mummifying. Many of these people were sacrificed, 4 of which were trophy heads. But their preservation gave researchers the opportunity to chemically analyze the hair of 22 of these ancient people. They found evidence of not only coca, but also ayahuasca. Ayahuasca contains one of the most powerful psychedelic substances on Earth, dimethyltryptamine, also known as DMT. Users describe how it can pull you entirely away from reality, including encounters with entities from other realms. Researchers think that the mummies at Cahuachi were given ayahuasca to calm and disorient them before their lives were taken. But ayahuasca had to be imported all the way from the Amazon. Here it was used for shamanistic rituals for thousands of years. Its powerful psychedelic effects were clearly quite useful for shamans. There are many ways to create the drug, as multiple plant species naturally have it. The most common method is by boiling a specific root and the leaves of a specific shrub. The mixture is drunk with the guide of a shaman. Another method involves smoking Andinothera beans. And in Argentina, a pipe made from the bone of a mountain lion was found with traces of DMT dating back to 4,000 years ago. It is insane to think that some guy 4,000 years ago was smoking DMT in the Andes. But another extremely powerful psychedelic substance was used in the Americas even earlier. Peyote is a tiny unassuming cactus, but inside of it is mescaline, an incredibly powerful psychedelic substance. The plant produces it to defend against herbivores, as it is incredibly bitter and disorienting. But of course, ancient humans found a way to turn it into a powerful psychedelic experience. An archaeological dig in Texas found evidence that Native Americans have been using this plant for at least 5,500 years. Medicine men would use it during shamanic ceremonies to heal their communities and acquire wisdom, an unbroken tradition that dates back to the Ice Age in Eurasia. When Europeans made it to the region, peyote was documented among dozens of groups including the Apache, Tonkawa, and Comanche. As the tribes were colonized, and the government tried to destroy native culture, peyote was made illegal. But famous Comanche chief Quanah Parker fought hard to maintain the use of peyote in his people's spiritual practices. He created a spiritual movement blending aspects of Christianity with indigenous beliefs and peyote use. He famously said, "The white man goes into his church and talks about Jesus. The Indian goes in his teepee and talks with Jesus." This quote explains just how intimate the role of peyote was in many Native American cultures going back thousands of years. But the practice of speaking directly to the spirit world wasn't limited to the Americas. Another substance may have actually inspired some of the most popular religions on Earth. The poppy plant is one of the wildest plants out there. It naturally produces both morphine and codeine, both of which are incredibly potent narcotics. The unripe seeds produce a milky substance that, when dried, is referred to as opium, which can be eaten or smoked. And ancient humans knew just how powerful it was. As far back as 8,600 years ago, poppy remains have been found in sites across Europe. The plant seems to have been domesticated as early as 8,000 years ago around the Mediterranean. Now, they may have just been eating the ripe seeds, though it wasn't a leap for them to find out that the unripe seeds can give you an incredible high. Stone Age farmers across Europe and Asia were consuming poppy seeds and, in all likelihood, getting high. By the time civilization emerged, we know for a fact that opium was well known. The Minoans even had a poppy goddess. Ceramic vessels have been found with a figure in a strange position with poppies protruding from their headband. The largest known statue of the goddess was found near a tabular vase used for inhaling opium smoke. Opium may have been the basis for cultic rituals that would have influence on later Greek traditions. The Sumerians were also fond of opium poppies, which they called the joy plant. Sumerian priests used opium to reach a higher state of spirituality. At a 4,000-year-old palace in the Syrian city of Ebla, archaeologists found traces of poppy alongside other medicinal plants. The room's location at the heart of the palace, combined with cuneiform tablets mentioning priests taking unknown ritual beverages, strongly hints at ceremonial usage. Like in Greece, opium was used in cultic rituals by the upper classes. Many of the religions of the period and in the modern day may have some ties to these early drug-fueled rituals. And with a drug as powerful as opium, I'm not surprised. It is hilarious to realize that some ancient priests in these societies were full-blown drug addicts. Scholars suggest that the impact of these psychoactive substances has been underestimated, and that a drug culture was central to ritual across the ancient world. Drug use in modern times has often been framed as a moral weakness, but in reality, it couldn't be more human. From tripping Homo erectus in Pleistocene Africa, to shamans in Ice Age Europe, to you cracking open a beer on a Friday night, the impulse of drug use is natural. That doesn't mean it's good or bad. I'm just providing you with the historical information so you can make your own decisions without any cultural stigma. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, click this video next to learn more about ancient humans. Also subscribe.